Hello, my dear friends. You are standing in a tomb that should not exist. The air is thick with the smell of ancient dust and the faint sweetness of cedar resin that has lingered here for 3,000 years. Your torch flickers against walls painted in colors so vivid they seem to pulse with life. Gold and lapis lazuli blue and the deep red of ochre. But something is wrong. Everywhere you look, faces have been chiseled away. Names have been scraped from the stone. Cartouches that once held royal titles are now nothing but rough, empty ovals. Someone wanted this person erased from history. Someone wanted the world to forget they ever existed. You reach out and touch the cold stone where a face once was. Your fingers find the grooves left by ancient chisels. Someone worked hard to destroy this image. They struck again and again until nothing remained but a blank space where a pharaoh once stood. But they failed, because you are here, and you are about to learn the name they tried so desperately to erase. You are about to meet Hatshepsut, the woman who became king, the pharaoh who ruled Egypt for over 20 years and built monuments that still stand today. The queen whose very existence was so threatening that her successors spent decades trying to wipe her from the record of time. Now step back from the wall, let your eyes adjust to the darkness beyond your torchlight, listen to the silence of this place. For 3,000 years, this tomb has kept its secrets. The priests who sealed it are long dead. The workers who carved it have returned to dust. Even the civilization that built it has crumbled and been reborn a dozen times over. But Hatshepsut endures. Her story survives despite everything they did to destroy it. And tonight, we will walk together through the sands of ancient Egypt. We will stand in the shadow of her obelisks. We will enter her mortuary temple carved into the living rock of the cliffs at Deir el-Bahri. We will learn how a woman in one of history's most rigidly patriarchal societies rose to become the most powerful person on earth. Here is what most people believe about ancient Egypt. They believe the pharaohs were always men. They believe women were kept in harems, beautiful but powerless, their only role to produce heirs. They picture Cleopatra, the famous queen who seduced Caesar and Mark Antony. But Cleopatra was not truly Egyptian. She was Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. And she ruled a dying Egypt, a pale shadow of its former glory. Hatshepsut was different. She ruled during the 18th dynasty, when Egypt was at the height of its power. She was born into the most powerful family on earth, and she did not seduce her way to the throne. She simply took it. This was not supposed to be possible. Egypt had rules. Egypt had traditions that stretched back for over 1,000 years. The pharaoh was the living embodiment of the god Horus. The pharaoh was the son of Ra, the sun god himself. And the pharaoh was always male, except when she wasn't. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we will drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. To understand Hatshepsut, we must first understand the world she was born into. Egypt in the 15th century BCE was not the crumbling ruin of pyramids and sand that we imagine today. It was a living, breathing superpower. The Nile River had been flooding its banks for millennia, leaving behind rich black soil that made Egypt the breadbasket of the ancient world. While other civilizations struggled to feed their people, Egypt had surplus. That surplus meant wealth, and wealth meant power. The pharaohs of the 18th dynasty had transformed Egypt into an empire. They had driven out foreign invaders called the Hyksos, who had humiliated Egypt for over a century. They had conquered lands to the south, pushing deep into Nubia and its gold mines. They had expanded north into the Levant, demanding tribute from the kingdoms of Canaan and Syria. Egypt was not just a country, It was the dominant force in the known world, and at the very center of this power sat the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was not merely a king. In Egyptian belief, the Pharaoh was a god living among mortals. He was the intermediary between the human world and the divine. When he performed rituals, he was maintaining the cosmic order itself. When he led armies, he was doing the will of the gods. When he died, he would join the gods in the afterlife and continue to protect Egypt for eternity. This was Ma'at, the concept of divine order, truth and justice that governed all of Egyptian society. The Pharaoh was the guardian of Ma'at. Without him, chaos would consume the world. Crops would fail, the Nile would not flood, enemies would invade. The dead would not find peace in the afterlife. Everything depended on the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh was always supposed to be a man. The word itself meant great house, referring to the royal palace. But over time, it came to mean the divine king who lived within that house. A man who wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. A man who held the crook and flail, symbols of his authority over all people. A man who wore the false beard of kingship, connecting him to Osiris, Lord of the Dead. A woman could be queen. She could be the great royal wife, the most important of the Pharaoh's many wives. She could bear sons who would become pharaohs. She could wield influence behind the scenes. But she could not be Pharaoh. That was the rule. That was the tradition. That was what everyone believed, until Hatshepsut shattered those beliefs like pottery thrown against stone. She was born around 57 BCE, give or take a few years. We cannot be certain of exact dates from this period. The Egyptians did not use a calendar that we can easily convert to our modern system. They counted years by the reign of each pharaoh. Year 1 of Thutmose I, Year 3 of Hatshepsut, and so on. Her father was Thutmose I, a pharaoh who had risen from non-royal origins. His wife, Ahmose, was of the royal bloodline. This was important. In Egyptian royal tradition, legitimacy often passed through the female line. The blood of the gods flowed through the queens as much as the kings. By marrying Ahmose, Thutmose I had connected himself to the divine lineage of the pharaohs. And by being born from Ahmose, Hatshepsut carried that divine blood in her veins. She was a princess of Egypt, the highest-born woman in the most powerful country on earth. She would have been raised in the royal palace at Thebes. This was not the Thebes of Greece. This was Waset, the great city on the Nile that we now call Luxor. Imagine it in its glory. Massive temple complexes dedicated to Amun, king of the gods, avenues lined with sphinx statues stretching toward the river, palaces with gardens and pools where lotus flowers bloomed, the sounds of priests chanting and incense burning, the sight of the pharaoh being carried on a golden throne shaded by ostrich feather fans. This was the world Hatshepsut knew from birth. She would have been educated in ways that most women were not. She learned to read and write hieroglyphics. She studied the religious rituals and ceremonies. She understood the complex bureaucracy that governed Egypt. We know she was intelligent and ambitious. The records she left behind, the ones that survived the destruction, speak of a woman who thought deeply about her role in the world. But intelligence and ambition meant little for a princess. Her fate was to be married, to produce sons, to support the men who held real power. Her half-brother was named Thutmose. We called him Thutmose II to distinguish him from their father. He was the son of Thutmose the Mus and a lesser wife named Mutnefret. He did not carry the same pure royal blood that Hatshepsut did. But he was male, and in the logic of Egyptian succession, that made all the difference. When Thutmose I died, Thutmose II became pharaoh, and Hatshepsut became his queen. She was probably in her teenage years when she married. Her husband was sickly. The evidence we have from his mummy and from texts of the period suggests he was not a strong man. He may have suffered from a skin disease. He certainly did not live long. But for now, Hatshepsut was queen of Egypt, the great royal wife. the most powerful woman in the world. Yet still just a woman, her role was to support her husband, to appear beside him in ceremonies, to give him legitimate children who would continue the dynasty. She did give him a daughter, a princess named Neferure, who would become very important in the years to come. But she did not give him a son, at least not one who survived. The son who would eventually become Thutmose III was born to a lesser wife, a woman named Isis, who was probably a concubine or harem wife. This child was of royal blood through his father, but through his mother he was common. In the complex calculus of Egyptian royal legitimacy, this mattered. Hatshepsut, with her pure royal blood, was more divine than the child who would eventually be named as heir. We do not know exactly how Hatshepsut felt during these years. The records tell us facts, not feelings. They tell us that Thutmose II conducted military campaigns in Nubia and against Bedouin tribes. They tell us that Hatshepsut was honored and respected as queen. They tell us that the kingdom prospered. But they do not tell us whether she was content with her role. They do not tell us whether she looked at her weak husband and thought about what she could do better. They do not tell us whether she already dreamed of power. Then Thutmose II died. He had ruled for only about 14 years, possibly less. Some scholars think his reign was as short as 3 years. The records are unclear. What is clear is that Egypt suddenly had a problem. The heir to the throne was a child. Thutmose III was probably no more than 2 or 3 years old when his father died. An infant cannot rule an empire. He cannot lead armies. He cannot perform the sacred rituals that keep Ma'at in balance. He cannot negotiate with foreign powers or manage the massive bureaucracy of the Egyptian state. Egypt needed a regent, someone to rule in the name of the child king until he came of age. And who better than the great royal wife? Who better than the woman who carried the purest royal blood in all of Egypt? Who better than Hatshepsut? She became regent for her stepson. This was not unusual. Other queens had served as regents before. A mother or stepmother guiding a young king was an accepted part of Egyptian political tradition. What was unusual was what Hatshepsut did next. For the first few years, she played her role exactly as expected. The texts from this period show Thutmose III as Pharaoh, with Hatshepsut supporting him from behind. She used titles appropriate for a regent queen. She appeared in art standing behind the young king, smaller in scale, clearly subordinate. Everything was proper. Everything followed tradition. And then, sometime around year 7 of the reign, everything changed. Hatshepsut stopped being regent. She became Pharaoh. Not queen regnant, not female king. Simply Pharaoh, she adopted the full royal titulary, the 5 great names that every pharaoh held. She was now the Horus, the living god. She was the daughter of Ra. She was king of Upper and Lower Egypt. She wore the false beard. She wore the double crown. In official art, she was depicted as a man, bare-chested, wearing the short kilt of a king with the male body that pharaohs were supposed to have. This was unprecedented. This was revolutionary. This was, in the eyes of many, impossible. And yet it happened. How did she do it? How did a woman convince the most conservative, tradition-bound society in the ancient world to accept her as king? The answer lies in a combination of political genius, religious propaganda, and the unique circumstances of the moment. Hatshepsut did not seize power through force. There is no evidence of civil war or violent struggle. She did not murder her stepson, despite what later movies and novels might suggest. Thutmose III continued to exist. He continued to be recognized as Pharaoh. He was not imprisoned or exiled. He was simply overshadowed. Hatshepsut became the senior pharaoh, the dominant partner in an unprecedented co-regency, the one who actually ruled while her stepson grew up. To legitimize this extraordinary arrangement, she turned to religion. She did not claim that the rules should be changed. She did not argue that women deserved equal power. Instead, she claimed that she was special, that she was an exception. that the gods themselves had chosen her to rule, she commissioned elaborate reliefs that told the story of her divine birth. In these carvings, which still survive at her mortuary temple, the god Ammon himself comes to her mother Ahmoz. He appears in the form of Thutmose the Defied, but he is really the king of the gods. A divine fragrance fills the room. Ahmoz recognizes the god and submits to him, and from this divine union, Hatshepsut is conceived. She is not merely of royal blood. She is the literal daughter of Ammon, born from the body of a queen, but fathered by the greatest of all gods. This made her more than human. This made her legitimate in a way that no mere man could question. If the gods had chosen her, who were mortals to object? But propaganda alone was not enough. She needed human support as well, and she found it in a man named Senenmut. Senenmut is one of the most fascinating figures in Egyptian history. He came from humble origins. His parents were not nobles. They were ordinary Egyptians, probably from somewhere in Middle Egypt. How he rose to prominence at court is unknown, but rise he did. By the time Hatshepsut took power, Senenmut held more titles than almost anyone in Egyptian history. He was steward of the estates of Ammon. He was overseer of all royal works. He was tutor to the princess Neferua. He was, by all appearances, the second most powerful person in Egypt. His relationship with Hatshepsut has fascinated scholars for centuries. Were they lovers? There is graffiti, ancient sketches left by workers that suggest a sexual relationship, but graffiti is gossip, not evidence. The official records reveal nothing improper. What we know for certain is that Senenmut was devoted to Hatshepsut. He oversaw the construction of her greatest monuments. He appears in her temple more often than any other official. He was given the extraordinary privilege of carving his image inside her sacred spaces. Without Senenmut, Hatshepsut's reign might have looked very different. He was the architect of her glory, both literally and figuratively. Together they embarked on a building program that rivaled anything Egypt had ever seen. The most spectacular achievement of Hatshepsut's reign was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Even today, it takes your breath away. Imagine approaching it 3,000 years ago. You are walking across the desert floor. The sun is blinding. Heat rises from the sand in shimmering waves, and then you see it, rising from the base of towering cliffs, a temple of white limestone terraces. 3 levels, connected by ramps, ascending toward the living rock. Colonnades with columns carved to look like papyrus reeds. Statues of the Pharaoh, dozens of them, standing as eternal guardians. And painted reliefs, brilliant with color, telling the stories of Hatshepsut's divine birth and greatest achievements. The temple is called Djeser, the Holy of Holies. It was the place where Hatshepsut would be worshipped for eternity, where priests would make offerings long after her death, where her spirit, would receive sustenance forever. Senenmut designed it, or at least he oversaw its construction. He may have drawn inspiration from a nearby temple built by Mentuhotep II, a pharaoh who had reunited Egypt 500 years earlier. But Hatshepsut's temple far surpassed its model. It was larger. It was more elegant. It was perfectly proportioned to its dramatic setting. The cliffs behind it formed a natural amphitheater. The temple seemed to emerge from the rock itself, as if the mountain were giving birth to something divine. And carved into those walls were the great stories of her reign. On the lower terrace, you could see the expedition to Punt. This was one of Hatshepsut's proudest achievements. Punt was a mysterious land, somewhere along the Red Sea coast. Perhaps in modern Somalia or Eritrea or Yemen, no one is entirely certain. The Egyptians called it the land of the gods. It was the source of incense, myrrh, ebony, gold, and exotic animals. Hatshepsut sent a trading expedition to Punt. 5 ships sailed down the Nile, were transported overland to the Red Sea, and then continued south to this legendary land. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahari show the entire journey, the ships with their distinctive rigging, the strange landscape of Punt with its houses built on stilts, The king and queen of Punt rendered in unflattering detail. The queen, named 80, is shown as enormously fat. This was not mockery. It was documentary accuracy. Egyptian artists drew what they saw, and what they saw amazed them. They brought back treasures beyond counting. Living myrrh trees, their roots wrapped in baskets. Incense that would burn in the temples of Amun. Exotic animals including baboons and a giraffe. Gold and ivory and precious woods. The expedition to Punt was a triumph. It demonstrated that Hatshepsut could do what pharaohs were supposed to do. She could reach across the world and bring back its riches. She could please the gods with offerings from the most exotic lands. She could expand Egypt's influence without necessarily going to war. Speaking of war, here is another myth we must address. For a long time, scholars believed that Hatshepsut was a pacifist, that her reign was defined by peaceful trade and building projects rather than military campaigns, that she somehow feminized Egyptian foreign policy, preferring diplomacy to combat. This turns out to be largely wrong. The evidence shows that Hatshepsut did conduct military campaigns. Egyptian forces under her command fought in Nubia. They campaigned in the Levant. They maintained the empire her predecessors had built. She simply did not emphasize these campaigns in the same way that other pharaohs did. Her monuments celebrate trade and building more than conquest. But the armies still marched. The generals still commanded. The empire did not shrink during her reign. Why did scholars believe otherwise for so long? Partly because her successors tried to erase her. They removed her name from many monuments. They credited her achievements to other pharaohs. When archaeologists first reconstructed her reign, many records were missing or damaged. They filled the gaps with assumptions, and one assumption was that a woman would not fight. This was projection. Modern scholars, even into the 20th century, assumed that a female ruler would be peaceful, gentle, perhaps weak. They saw what they expected to see. Recent scholarship has corrected this view. Hatshepsut was a pharaoh like any other. She maintained the military. She defended the borders. She was not some ancient pacifist queen ruling a hippie commune on the Nile. She was a divine king with all the responsibilities that entailed, including the responsibility to crush Egypt's enemies when necessary. But she chose to emphasize other things. Her building program was the greatest Egypt had seen in generations. Beyond Deir el-Bahri, she erected obelisks at Karnak that still stand today. Obelisks were among the most difficult and expensive monuments to create. They required quarrying a single piece of granite, sometimes over 100 feet tall. The granite came from Aswan, far up the Nile. It had to be carved out of the bedrock, transported downriver, and erected without cracking. Many obelisks broke during this process. The ones that survive are testimonies to incredible engineering skill. Hatshepsut raised at least 4 obelisks at Karnak. One of them is the tallest surviving ancient obelisk in Egypt. It stands over 97 feet high and weighs approximately 320 tons. On it, she carved her justification for ruling. She wrote that her father Thutmose I had crowned her as king while he was still alive, that she was his chosen successor, that she had always been destined to rule. Whether this was true or propaganda is impossible to say. Probably it was a mixture of both. Thutmose I may well have favored his daughter. She was clearly intelligent and capable. He may have educated her for leadership in ways that went beyond what was normal for a princess. But whether he actually crowned her as king is doubtful. If he had, why would she have needed to seize power years later? Why would she have served as regent at all? The claim was useful. It gave her legitimacy. It connected her rule to her father's divine authority. And since Thutmose I was dead and could not contradict her, who was to say otherwise? This was how Egyptian politics worked. The past was constantly being rewritten to serve the present. Kings claimed achievements they did not accomplish. They erased the names of predecessors they wished to dishonor. History was not a fixed record, but a living document that each pharaoh edited to their advantage. Hatshepsut was simply playing by the rules. She played them brilliantly. For over 2 decades, she ruled Egypt as pharaoh. She managed the bureaucracy. She maintained the temples. She kept the army strong and the borders secure. She commissioned art and architecture that amazed her contemporaries and astounds us today. And all the while, young Thutmose III grew up in her shadow. What was his life like? We can only imagine. He was pharaoh in name, but not in practice. His stepmother made all the real decisions. He appeared in official art, but always secondary to her. At ceremonies, she took the lead. In the temples, her name came first. He was trained for kingship. We know he studied military tactics. We know he became an excellent general. Perhaps Hatshepsut arranged this training, preparing him for the day when he would rule alone. Or perhaps he sought out military training as an escape from his subordinate position. In the army, he could be a leader. In the army, he could prove himself. In the army, he was not overshadowed by a woman who had taken what should have been his. Did he resent her? For years, scholars assumed he must have. They pointed to the destruction of her monuments after her death as evidence of his hatred. She had usurped his throne. Of course he wanted revenge. But the evidence does not quite support this simple narrative. The destruction of Hatshepsut's images did not begin immediately after her death. It may have started as late as 20 years later. And the destruction was selective. Some images were destroyed. Others were left untouched. Some names were replaced with those of Thutmose II or III. Others were simply erased with nothing put in their place. This does not look like the work of a bitter man taking immediate revenge on a hated stepmother. It looks like something else, something more complicated, something political. Let us consider what happened when Hatshepsut died. The exact date is uncertain. It was probably around 1458 BCE, give or take a few years. She was in her late 40s or early 50s. This was old age by ancient standards. She had ruled as pharaoh for about 22 years. She had accomplished more than most pharaohs dreamed of. Her temples were complete. Her obelisks pierced the sky. Her expeditions had reached the ends of the earth. Her name was carved in stone from one end of Egypt to the other. And then she was gone. The transition of power appears to have been smooth. Thutmose III simply continued ruling, now as the sole pharaoh. He did not erase her memory immediately. He did not tear down her temples. He did not hunt down her supporters. In fact, some officials who had served Hatshepsut continued to serve Thutmose III. They were not purged or punished. Senenmut is a mystery. He disappears from the record around year 16 of Hatshepsut's reign. He may have died. He may have fallen from favor. His tombs were vandalized, but we do not know when or by whom. His fate remains unknown. But the other officials of Hatshepsut's court seem to have transitioned peacefully to the new regime. So why, eventually, were her monuments attacked? One theory is dynastic legitimacy. Thutmose III had sons. He wanted them to succeed him. He wanted to establish a clear line of succession that did not include female pharaohs. By erasing Hatshepsut, he was not taking personal revenge. He was fixing the historical record. He was making it clear that women did not become pharaohs, that what happened with Hatshepsut was an aberration that would not be repeated. He was protecting his descendants from future challenges by ambitious queens. This theory explains the timing. Late in his reign, when Thutmose III was thinking about his legacy, he began the erasure. He was an old man then, one of the longest reigning pharaohs in Egyptian history. He had proven himself through military campaigns that made Egypt larger than ever before. He did not need to feel threatened by a dead woman, but he needed to ensure that his dynasty was secure, and that meant removing the precedent Hatshepsut had set. Another theory focuses on religion. Hatshepsut had claimed special connection to Amun. She had made much of her divine birth, her status as daughter of the god. But religious politics in Egypt were complex. Different priesthoods competed for influence. Different gods rose and fell in prominence. Perhaps by erasing Hatshepsut, Thutmose III was also adjusting the balance of power among the temples. Perhaps he was reducing the influence of certain priests who had supported her. We simply do not know for certain. The erasure itself was carried out over many years. Workers carefully chiseled out her figures. They scraped away her names. They replaced her images with those of her father, husband, or stepson. In some places, they built walls to hide decorated surfaces rather than destroy them. This suggests the erasure was not entirely vengeful. If Thutmose III had truly hated her, he would have destroyed everything. Instead, much was simply hidden, covered but not obliterated, waiting to be discovered thousands of years later. And discovered it was. The rediscovery of Hatshepsut is a story almost as dramatic as her life. For over 3,000 years, she was largely forgotten. The erasure had worked. Later Egyptian records barely mentioned her. Greek historians who visited Egypt learned about the great pharaohs, but not about the woman king. When European explorers began investigating Egyptian monuments in the 18th and 19th centuries, they were confused by what they found. At Deir el-Bahari, they saw a magnificent temple, but the cartouches had been altered. The pronouns in inscriptions switched between masculine and feminine. Some reliefs showed a woman, others showed a man. Some statues had been destroyed, others remained intact. What was going on? Early Egyptologists assumed there must have been two rulers, perhaps a king named Thutmose and a queen consort. The confusion was understandable given the state of the evidence. It took decades of careful scholarship to piece together the truth. The breakthrough came in the late 19th century. Scholars began to realize that this was not a king and queen. This was a single person who had been depicted both as female and male. A queen who had become king. A woman who had ruled Egypt at the height of its power. Her mummy was harder to find. The tomb she had prepared for herself was discovered in the Valley of the Kings. But her body was not in it. The coffin was empty. What had happened to her? For years, this was another mystery. Her mummy was eventually identified in 2007 through CT scanning and DNA analysis. It had been sitting in a storage room of the Cairo Museum for over 100 years. It was labeled as an unknown female from tomb KV60, a minor tomb in the Valley of the Kings. No one had recognized it as the Great Pharaoh. The identification was made possible by a tooth. A box with Hatshepsut's name on it contained a single molar tooth. Researchers scanned the tooth and compared it to the unidentified mummy. The tooth fit perfectly into an empty socket in the mummy's jaw. After 3,000 years, Hatshepsut had been found. Her body told its own story. She was obese in her later years. She suffered from diabetes. She may have had cancer. She had bad teeth, worn down by the gritty bread that all Egyptians ate. She was human, despite all the propaganda about divine birth. Despite the claims of eternal life, she was a woman who aged and suffered and died. Like all of us, what was the legacy she left behind? Beyond the monuments, beyond the mysteries, what did Hatshepsut actually accomplish? First and most obviously, she proved that a woman could rule Egypt. She did not just survive, she thrived. For over 2 decades, she managed one of history's most complex civilizations. The Nile flooded on schedule, the temples received their offerings, the armies maintained order, the traders brought in wealth from distant lands. By every measure the Egyptians would have used, her reign was successful. Ma'at was maintained. The gods were pleased. The kingdom prospered. This should not have been possible according to Egyptian theology. The pharaoh was male by definition. The rituals were designed for a male body, a male spirit, a male connection to the gods. And yet Hatshepsut made it work. She adapted. She presented herself as male when necessary. She emphasized her divine birth when challenged. She built monuments that overwhelmed any possible doubts. She ruled. She simply ruled. And that was enough. Second, she expanded Egyptian trade and diplomacy in ways that had lasting effects. The expedition to Punt re-established connections that had been dormant for decades. The incense trees she brought back were planted at Deir el-Bahari. They did not survive, but the attempt showed a concern for sustainability unusual in ancient rulers. She wanted the blessings of Punt to continue forever. Her trading networks reached deep into Africa and across the sea to lands the Egyptians barely knew. She demonstrated that Egyptian power could be projected through commerce as well as conquest. Third, her building program employed thousands of workers and artists. It created expertise that would be used for generations. The craftsmen who carved Deir el-Bahari went on to train others. The techniques developed under her reign were refined under her successors. Her monuments were templates that later pharaohs would imitate. She raised the standard for what a pharaoh could achieve. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, she existed. She showed that the rules could be broken. She showed that tradition was not destiny. She showed that ability mattered more than gender when it came to ruling an empire. This was dangerous. This was why she was erased. This was why Thutmose III and his successors tried so hard to pretend she had never been. Because if she had done it once, another woman might do it again. And in fact, others did. Centuries later, other queens would take power in Egypt. They could not claim to be the first. Hatshepsut was the first, but they followed in the path she had carved. The night is deepening around us now. The torches are burning low. Let us leave the temples and the politics and spend our remaining time with Hatshepsut herself, not the pharaoh, not the king, the woman. What was she like? We have to imagine. The records tell us what she did, not who she was. But we can make some reasonable guesses. She was confident. No one seizes the throne of Egypt without tremendous self-belief. She must have looked at her stepson at the court, at the priests and generals, and thought, I can do this better. And then she did. She was intelligent. The management of Egypt required constant attention to detail. Diplomatic correspondence had to be read and answered. Building projects had to be approved and funded. Religious ceremonies had to be performed correctly. Disputes had to be settled. A stupid ruler would have been exposed quickly. Hatshepsut ruled for over 2 decades. She was smart enough to manage one of history's most complex bureaucracies. She was patient. For several years, she served as regent without taking the crown. She built her support carefully. She chose her moment. And when she made her move, it worked. This was not impulsive. This was calculated. This was the work of someone who understood that power must be constructed brick by brick, like her temples. She was religious, or at least she understood the importance of religion. Her entire claim to power rested on divine sanction. She spent enormous resources on the temples. She cultivated the priesthood of Amun. She presented herself as more pious, more devoted, more favored by the gods than any king before her. Whether she truly believed all this or simply knew it was necessary, we cannot say, but she played the religious game masterfully. She may have been loving. She appears to have been close to her daughter Neferure. The princess appears frequently in the records, often alongside Senenmut. She was given titles and honors. She was educated. She may have been trained to succeed her mother. If so, that plan failed. Neferure disappears from the records before Hatshepsut's death. She may have died young. Hatshepsut may have mourned her only child. We simply do not know. She was artistic, or at least she had excellent taste. The monuments of her reign are among the most beautiful in Egyptian history. She chose styles and subjects that balanced tradition and innovation. She worked with master craftsmen and gave them resources to achieve perfection. She cared about beauty. She wanted to be remembered through magnificent works, and she has been. Even after the erasure, even after the defacement, her temple at Deir el-Bahari takes your breath away. It would have been even more stunning in her time. The colors were bright, the statues were whole. The gardens were planted with trees from the ends of the earth. It must have been one of the wonders of the ancient world. She was controversial even in her own time. We can sense this from the defensiveness of some of her inscriptions. She constantly justifies herself. She constantly explains why the gods chose her. She constantly reminds everyone of her divine birth, her father's blessing, her right to rule. People who are secure in their power do not need to repeat these things so often. Hatshepsut knew she was unusual. She knew there were those who questioned her. She used every tool available to answer those questions. Stone and gold and the words of the gods themselves. And then she was mortal after all. In her final years, she grew heavy. Her health declined. The diabetes or cancer or whatever ailment took her began its work. She prepared for death as all pharaohs did. She commissioned a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. She had a sarcophagus carved. She made arrangements for the rituals that would ensure her eternal life. And then she crossed into the west. She met Osiris and was judged. Her heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. According to Egyptian belief, she passed the test. She became one with the gods she had always claimed as family. Her body was mummified and laid to rest. Her spirit lived on in the offerings made at her temple. For a few years, everything continued as she had planned, and then the erasure began. What would she think if she could see us now? 3,500 years have passed since she walked the earth. Her empire is gone. Her gods are no longer worshipped. Her language is spoken only by scholars. Her country has been conquered and reconquered a dozen times. Greek pharaohs ruled it. Roman emperors claimed it. Arab conquest transformed it. Ottoman governors administered it. British colonizers exploited it. And through all of this, her monuments endured, battered, defaced, buried in sand, but not destroyed. They waited. And eventually, we came. We came with our cameras and our notebooks and our endless curiosity about the past. We decoded the hieroglyphics that she thought only priests could read. We pieced together her story from fragments and shadows. We found her body in a storage room and identified it with technology she could not have imagined. We remember her. That was what she wanted most. The whole point of the temples and tombs was to be remembered, to have offerings made, to have names spoken, to continue existing in some form forever. The Egyptians believed that speaking someone's name gave them power. It sustained them in the afterlife. As long as the name was spoken, the person could not truly die. Thutmose III tried to kill her by erasing her name. But tonight, I have spoken it. Hatshepsut, and you have heard it, and somewhere in whatever realm the ancient dead inhabit, perhaps she knows. Perhaps she is pleased. Perhaps the offerings she expected from priests are now replaced by something she never anticipated. The attention of people 3,000 years in the future. People who know nothing of Egypt except what they have learned from books and videos. People who will never stand in her temple or see her mummy. But people who remember. That is its own form of immortality, not quite what she planned, but perhaps even better. Let yourself drift now. The story is nearly told. The torches have burned to embers. The temple is quiet. Outside, the stars are wheeling overhead. The same stars that Hatshepsut watched from the roof of her palace. The same stars that guided her ships to Punt. The same stars that shone on her funeral procession as her body was carried to the Valley of the Kings. They do not care about the concerns of mortals. They shine on regardless. Pharaohs come and go, empires rise and fall, but the stars endure, and in their light everything human seems small. But that smallness is not shameful, it is simply true. We are small, our lives are brief. Our works will crumble, our names will eventually be forgotten, no matter how deeply we carve them in stone. This is the lesson of Hatshepsut, not that we can become immortal, but that we can try, we can build, we can create, we can push against the limits of what is possible. We can be more than we were supposed to be, and when we are gone, perhaps something will remain, a temple, a statue, a story told to strangers on quiet nights. The specific does not matter. What matters is the effort. What matters is the refusal to accept limits. What matters is the voice that says, I will not be forgotten. Hatshepsut said that, and here we are, 3 millennia later, still listening. The night grows deeper. Your breath is slowing. The world of ancient Egypt is fading like a dream upon waking. Let it fade. You have walked those streets tonight. You have stood in that temple. You have heard that name. It will stay with you. And tomorrow, when you wake, you will carry a piece of Hatshepsut forward into the future. One more day that she is remembered. Sleep now. Let the darkness wrap around you like linen bandages wrapped around the dead. But you are not dead. You are alive. You are breathing. You are warm. And you are connected to a chain of human beings stretching back to the very beginning. Hatshepsut is part of that chain. She was born as you were born. She hoped and feared as you hope and fear. She wanted to be remembered as all of us want to be remembered. She was human. That is the simple truth beneath all the gold and stone. She was human. And so are you. And in that shared humanity, you are never alone. The past is not gone. It lives in every breath you take. It lives in the words you speak. It lives in the questions you ask about who came before. We are all of us archaeologists, sifting through the rubble of time. We are all of us priests, speaking the names of the dead. We are all of us pharaohs, trying to build something that will outlast us. Sleep well tonight. Dream of ancient Egypt, if you will. Dream of white temples against brown cliffs. Dream of obelisks piercing blue sky. Dream of a woman wearing the false beard of kingship, staring out at the world with eyes that see further than any man could see. Dream of Hatshepsut, and know that in dreaming of her, you give her life. The night is long, but not forever. Morning will come. You awake to your own world with its own challenges, but you awake having touched something eternal. The story of one woman who refused to be what she was told to be. One woman who became what she knew she was. One woman whose name, despite everything, survived. Hatshepsut, Queen of Egypt, King of Upper and Lower Egypt, daughter of Amun, builder of wonders, one who still speaks across the silence of millennia, one who was erased but never forgotten. Good night, my dear friends. Sleep deeply and carry the past with you into tomorrow.